Canto 2, Chapter 3, text number 18. This 18 begins a series of verses emphasizing detachment from worldly sense enjoyment, detachment. The purpose of detachment is not just being a tyagi, but to have unobstructed attachment to Krishna, or see it the other way, attachments to the temporary, particularly, the expectation of enjoyment coming from senses and sense objects meeting together. That expectation blocks bhakti. So here it's kind of extreme, but it gives us a sense of the principle of detachment. I mean, in the Dhruva story is like really, really extreme, and this is extreme. But it's the method is compare, contrast. It's a teaching method. To understand something, you contrast it with something else. It's not something else. It goes in that direction. So text 18, Tarava means trees. Kim na jivanti. Do not the trees live? Do the trees not live? Do the bellows of the blacksmith not breathe? All around us, do the beasts not eat and discharge semen? Purport. Page and a half. The materialistic man of the modern age will argue that life, or part of it, is never meant for discussion of theosophical or theological arguments. Life is meant for the maximum duration of existence, for eating, drinking, sexual intercourse, making merry, and enjoying life. The modern man wants to live forever by the advancement of material science, and there are many foolish theories for prolonging life to the maximum duration. I forget who it was. I think it was Walt Disney. Somebody like that. Their will said they wanted their body to be frozen. Was it Walt Disney? So that when science figured out how to make life eternal, they could thaw his body out and he could be eternal Walt Disney. It was expensive. And who knows if that body is still in a frozen state, but become eternal through science. But the Srimad Bhagavatam affirms that life is not meant for so-called economic development or advancement of materialistic science, for the hedonistic philosophy of eating, mating, drinking, and merrymaking. What's it meant for? Life is solely meant for tapasya. Gosh. Purifying existence so that one may enter into eternal life just after the end of the human form of life. This teaching here is spoken again or amplified in Canto 5, Chapter 5. It's the instructions of Rishabdev. There was 100 sons. And he says the same thing. Same thing. Human form of life is not meant for living like animals. Human form is meant for performing austerities. It doesn't sound so inviting. But performing austerities means restricting the tendency for unrestricted sense enjoyment, restricting the tendency for unrestricted sense enjoyment, and instead directing energy that way, direct energy towards attaining the Supreme. Same idea. It's not unusual. And there's degrees, but the starting point is regulating or curbing that tendency for the sake of some higher purpose. Paragraph. The materialists want to prolong life as much as possible because they have no information of the next life. They want to get the maximum comforts in the present life because they think conclusively that there is no life after death. Now, many people believe there's life after death, not just rigid Vedic followers. Many people believe there's life after death. But what that is, they don't know. And without that knowledge, then there's attachment. So it's very common, it's almost universal, that one becomes attached to others, whether it's friends, family, relations, whatever. An attachment, it's natural for embodied beings to feel attachment for the temporary and temporary relations. But where the soul is going after, and what preparation is being made in this life for that reality, I mean, it's really easy to understand. How much time do people commonly, how much time do people invest in education from 5 years of age until whatever the years of age, depending on the degree of academic interest they have? How much time, how much energy, how many years? For what? Well, that education not only makes you smarter or more educated in how to navigate, it means there's a means of employment. And the means of employment is to get some fruit of that employment so I can live comfortably and have a sense of achievement, both subtle and gross. Contentment. And then time passes and time passes and time passes. How much time is being invested in preparing for the next life? Well, some people have an idea that there should be some piety, giving in charity or helping others and etc., charitable works, because it's the right thing to do, and that gives some entitlement to a better life in the next life. Some ideas like that for sure in the world. And also attaining heaven based upon something that I do in this life to prosper in this life and go forward into the next life. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 2, most people think, and it's true because I've done some surveys with audiences, most people think the purpose of the Vedas is just that, and there's nothing more. The purpose of the Vedas is to accrue piety or punya or kriti so that in this life I can live nicely, I can enjoy the fruits of that piety in this life, and after this life, go to the good place. And there's nothing more than that. Many people, most people, according to Bhagavad Gita, most people think that way. And then Krishna says, no, that's not the purpose of the Vedas. The purpose of the Vedas is something else. The purpose of the Vedas is to know him. So the austerities that one undergoes in education, and I'm sure those in this room and persons lots of austerity in education. You don't do other stuff and you just do that for a long time. So it's tapasya of one kind to achieve something. So the message here is don't do just for those temporary, but for the higher purpose, the ultimate purpose, the mission of, particularly the mission of human life. For purifying existence so that one may enter into eternal life, just after the end of the human form of life. Paragraph. The materialists want to prolong life as much as possible because they have no information of the next life. They want to get the maximum comforts in the present life because they think conclusively there's no life after death. This ignorance about the eternity of the living being and the change of covering in the material world has played havoc in the structure of modern human society. Consequently, there are many problems multiplied by various plans of modernized man. The plans for solving the problems of society have only aggravated the troubles. Even if it is possible to prolong life more than 100 years, advancement of human civilization does not necessarily follow. The Bhagavatam says that certain trees live for hundreds and thousands of years. At Vrindavan, there is a tamarind tree. The place is known as Imlital, which is said to have existed since the time of Lord Krishna. In the Calcutta Botanical Garden, there is a banyan tree said to be older than 500 years. And there are many such trees all over the world. Swami Shankaracharya lived for only 32 years. And Lord Chaitanya lived for 48 years. Does it mean that the prolonged life of the above-mentioned trees are more important than Shankara or Chaitanya? Prolonged life without spiritual value is not very important. One may doubt that trees have life because they do not breathe. But modern scientists like Bose have already proved that there is life in plants. So, breathing is no sign of actual life. The Bhagavatam says that the bellows of the blacksmith breathes very soundly, but that does not mean that the bellows has life. The materialist will argue that life in the tree and life in the man cannot be compared because the tree cannot enjoy life by eating palatable dishes or by enjoying sexual intercourse. In reply to this, the Bhagavatam asks whether other animals like dogs and hogs living in the same village with the human beings do not eat and enjoy sexual life. The specific utterance of Srimad Bhagavatam in regard to, quote, other animals means that persons who are simply engaged in planning a better type of animal life consisting of eating, breathing, and mating are also animals in the shape of human beings. A society of such polished animals cannot benefit suffering humanity, for an animal can easily harm another animal, but rarely do good. I mean, the composition is so beautiful. And, considering how prolific Prabhupada was, you're writing the thing like this, how long would it take for us to write something that's so eloquent as this? Whew. I was just reading about Vedanta Deshika. You know who's Vedanta Deshika? Vedanta Deshika was a very elevated acharya in the line of Ramanujacharya, a subsequent acharya. And he was a very, very prolific writer. So someone challenged him, can you write 1,000 verses in glorification of the padukas of Lord Ram in one day? He took the challenge. And in 3 hours, he composed a Shataka, 1,000, I think it's 1,008, in 3 hours. And, to this day, they're sung and revered. Glorifications of Lord Ramachandra, because it is said in Scripture that the paraphernalia of the Supreme Lord is worshipable. It's called Tadiya, and Tadiya is as worshipable as the Lord. Like, for example, this is from Hari Bhakti Vilas. Just heard a nice narration about, in relation to Jagannath's Rath Yatra that recently took place, nice discussion on what's Mahaprasad of Lord Jagannath. In Hari Bhakti Vilas, which is a manual written by Sanatana Goswami, compiled by Gopal Bhatta Goswami, but presented in a published form by Sanatana Goswami, there's a definition of prasadam. And prasadam definition is that which has contact with the personality of Godhead and touches his form, like a garland, a deity garland, or for that matter, anything that has direct contact with the Lord. So prasadam, like that which is offered to the deity, and there's different procedure for offering to the deity, but it's the spirit is love and devotion and offering, and different ways of doing that. But the Lord accepts. When it's offered with love, he accepts. So he can accept by his eyes, or he can accept by his ears, by hearing the prayers. He can accept from the heart of the devotee who wants to offer something with love. And procedures may vary, but it then becomes prasad, or chadiya, and it's worshipable. And therefore, lots of things we don't do with prasad. We don't put it on the floor and so forth and so on. Like, the Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam. It's in relation to the personality of Godhead. And that which is in relation to the personality of Godhead is as worshipable as the personality of Godhead. Like the name, or the teachings about the glorification of, or the glorification spoken by, like Bhagavad Gita. So, that which is in relation to the personality of Godhead is worshipable. And the goal and the process to reach the goal is to make that connection with the personality of Godhead. And the obstacle is, there's different ways of saying it, the obstacle is seeing things separate from the Lord, and thus seeing things separate from the Lord means I can be the enjoyer of that something because it's up for grabs. Or say it the other way. If I see things in relation to the Lord, then it's not meant for my enjoyment. It's meant for some service to the Lord. And when there's that mood of service to the Lord and is offered to the Lord, like fruits of work and everything, then that's the connection, or the link, or the yoga method. So this is the chapter 3 is discussing devotional service, which is bhakti yoga, and the previous 2.5 chapters have emphasized the importance of devotional service. Going back, starting from chapter 1, seeing nature in relation to the Lord. That's the universal form topic. And seeing in that way, engaging in devotional service. Just hearing from Jai Sachinandana about the history of Lewis and Clark crossing the country, etc., etc. And there's a Lewis and Clark College as on the way to places that we were going. So they have a big history of crossing the whole country and making maps and, meeting challenges and so forth and so on. But when they were seeing things, what was the purpose? The purpose was not, here's some opportunity to see the bounty of that God has created in this world and how it can be offered to him. It's, exploration and conquest and all those nice things. So they were gifted, And they did, amazing, extraordinary things against all odds. But it's missing the point. And so what's the point? It's missing. Making the connection of things with the personality of Godhead. And as long as that missing point remains missing, then society may become sophisticated, different ways of eating that are more sophisticated than how animals do, different ways of mating that's different than the way animals do, but essentially the same activities. The purpose of human life is not met by those things. It's a very beautiful purport how Prabhupada has laid out, making these, pointing out different, so someone that doesn't have an interest in understanding who we are and understanding the soul's connection with the Supreme and striving with the gifts of the human form of life to reach that destination. That's unfortunate. The human form of life remains unfortunate, or like a lower form of life, like an animal or whatever, some other form of life that doesn't have the asset of elevated consciousness to go for the real purpose of life. Or the lower forms of life are evolutionary process, changing one body to the next body in the evolutionary process, coming to the human form of life. And then what? There's meant to be an elevation, a further elevation of consciousness, or a further elevation of the faculties bestowed upon the human form of life to make that successful. Here's a little sharing, little story. During some part of my life in Krishna consciousness, I was distributing books in the airport. And 1 year after distributing books at the O'Hare Airport with a team of like 15 of us, it was really just descended on the airport and took over. It was pretty wild. The courts, or somehow there was an arrangement, maybe it was just an agreement, for permitting book distribution in the Puerto Rico airport, San Juan. So 2 devotees were selected to go to San Juan and start the book distribution in San Juan. I was one of them. And, Chicago and San Juan, or Puerto Rico, are a very different climate. So it was refreshing and, very different. I learned some Spanish. I had to learn some Spanish. And then after staying there for some time, we understood there are certain days of the week and certain times of the year that the airport is more busy, more quiet. So when it was more quiet, we decided, let's go to some of the other islands besides the airport and distribute books to some of those places on the other islands. Because after all, Lord Chaitanya said every town and village, etc. In a pioneering spirit, we took an airplane to some of the other islands. Now, some of the other islands actually had airports, and some of them you had to get to by a pontoon plane. Pontoon plane means they rest on pontoons, and you go to a dock and you get on the plane, and off it goes across the water and takes off. So we're flying over many islands to get to the island destination, looking out the window, and here's an island that became banana tree plantation because somebody saw here's an opportunity for economic development by growing bananas. Then bunch of ocean, and then another island. It became a military base. We could see from the air that somebody saw this is a good place to give protection to whoever they wanted to give protection to, so they made it into a military base. And then the place we were going was a tourist place. So same object, an island and an island and an island, but according to the desire for, inclination for life or protection or economic development or pleasure seeking, different people will see the same object in a different way. It was a nice appreciation. So, same. We arrive at the human form of life and we're carrying with us some impressions of our previous life and some tendencies of our previous life. And largely, not entirely, but largely, not really having a sense of the mission of life or its purpose, its higher purpose, its ultimate purpose. And we do those other things because of propensities. So this third chapter is devotional service. Prabhupada later called it devotional service, change of heart. Pure devotional service, change of heart. So where the heart moves from seeing the energy of Krishna as an opportunity for becoming an enjoyer of it, independent of him. The change of heart, it's the Bhakti principle. Same as we're hearing in the Dhruva story. The Bhakti principle is there's another purpose. And it takes some cultivation, takes some good association. It takes some restraining of the senses from sense indulgence in materialistic life and going towards a higher purpose. For that reason, regulating or restraining the senses from unrestricted sense gratification to directing the senses in a different way, in a devotional way, in a way of the objects are meant for the service of the Supreme. We discussed this yesterday. Tena chiktena bunjitaha. Seeing that there's some things that are meant for us, for our necessities, and we accept those things. But the necessities are supplied to the animals and the birds and the reptiles and the insects and, not same for the human form of life. The real business of human form of life is not taking care of necessities. We do things that are for the sake of taking care of necessities, and we accept those things, knowing that we haven't generated them. Rather, it's an arrangement of our Supreme Loving Father for our maintenance, and we move along with that purpose, rather than accumulating more and more and more and more, because that's insatiable demands of the senses. But seeing how we can work our way through this mission of human life for this higher purpose. So the starting point of the purport is most people don't have that higher purpose, and it's hedonism. That's the purpose. Or enjoying in this life with a higher grade, and the next life go to an even better place. And there's nothing more. That's common. I'll share one last thing and then I'll end. Maybe 4 different times in different places, I experimented with audiences that I didn't know. One outstanding one that's in my mind right now is at University of Jaipur. I was teaching for some time in Vrindavan during Kartik month. And there was a devotee, it was Kadamba Kanana Swami, who was the temple president in Vrindavan, during that period of time. And he had an assistant who had helped him to construct Prabhupada Samadhi, Pushpa Samadhi, in Mayapur. And after they finished the Pushpa Samadhi, Kadamba Swami became the temple president in Vrindavan. Very capable devotee. And his number one assistant, he requested him, why don't you go to Jaipur? Because Prabhupada liked Jaipur. There's a place of devotion to Krishna there. I'm sure you can establish a nice center. So he did. And Kadamba Swami in Vrindavan requested, now that the VIA, and when the VIAG is over, can you go to Jaipur and give association to this nice devotee? I said, sure. Thanks for the request. So when I went, knowing that I like college programs, there was a program scheduled at the University of Jaipur. So in the program at the University of Jaipur, it was packed hall. It was one of those, typical North Indian structures where the walls were like 3 feet thick and, very sterile, big room, kind of long and rectangular, and the place was packed. So not knowing the audience, I thought, do an icebreaker. I said, I'm going to make a statement, and I'd like you, after you hear the statement, please raise your hand if you believe this is a correct statement. Here's the statement. It just stated what Krishna says in chapter 2. The purpose of the Vedas is to teach us how to engage in pious activities so that in this life we can accumulate piety or punya, and as a result of that piety, then prosper in this life, and as for this life, go to the heavenly realm. How many of you would say that's a correct statement? The purpose of the Vedas. Let's see, raise your hand. And everyone raised their hand. Almost everyone raised their hand. And they took it seriously. It was interesting, because sometimes audiences don't respond, but this audience was very interactive. And then I said, is there anybody here in the room that has a different idea? And there was one girl in the back of the room, way in the back of the room, and she raised her hand. So I said, what's your different idea? And she described what she had read, Prabhupada's book, so she described the purpose. The purpose of the Vedas is to teach us that we're not this body, and the real purpose of the soul, being part and parcel of the Supreme, is to engage in activities meant for the satisfaction of the Supreme, making the offerings of all the fruits of our work unto the Supreme, and gradually coming to the position of God realization, knowing God, knowing Krishna. I said, fantastic. You must be reading Prabhupada's books. She said, yes. That's just a sample, and there's several others where it's true what Prabhupada explains and what Krishna said, it's true. Most people think, if they have some interest. Lots of people don't have interest. But those that have interest think that's the purpose. And there's nothing more. And then there's some people that understand there must be something more. And then there's the steps. So Canto 2, Chapter 3 is giving us steps. And part of this, one of the steps is detachment from that materialistic notion that the human form of life in particular is meant for hedonism. And because who knows, or there is no life after death, and so enjoy. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die. That saying. And it's not a new idea, not only a modern idea. It's Charvak Muni, making reference to the Vedas, taught that idea. Somehow he got that idea and said that's what the Vedas say. And he was a popular guy. popular guy. There's another purpose. And it takes, an honest individual to articulate so eloquently, like Prabhupada did here, but articulate there is another purpose. And there's encouragement to understand the shortcoming of the materialistic way of life. And I like this conclusion. A society of polished animals cannot benefit suffering humanity, for an animal can easily harm another animal, rarely do good. Very beautiful. Let's see if there's some discussion. I thank both of you for, how far away do you live to come here for this morning class? Far away? 15? 1-5. Oh, that's close. I'm from visiting here. I'm used to half an hour is minimum. Then more. Thank you for coming. Makes it nice. Any comments? Discussion? Yes?
What is the
You're on.
What is the impetus for one to pursue a higher purpose in this current modern age of where we are bombarded with all the sense enjoyment all around?
Well, there's multiple. One of them is previous activity. And previous activity is an impetus, that there's an inclination. Supposing somebody is in this life very musical, in their next life they're likely to be musical. Prabhupada said that about John Lennon. In his previous life he was a very accomplished musician. So from childhood he was musically inclined. There's perpetuation of inclination from one life to the next. So most likely, if there's some impetus for spiritual progress, commonly it's something in the previous life or lives. That inclination is now being continued in this life and searching for, that going further from where one left off in their previous life. It's described in the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. The destination of the unsuccessful yogi. That section, chapter 8. Another impetus is simply being thoughtful. Spiritual life is meant for those who are thoughtful. The phrase that Prabhupada selected was manishinam, just being thoughtful. And you can look at this and look at that and look at that and say, there's something wrong with this model. People are striving for happiness and there's something else is happening. So why? A thoughtful person doesn't just live like an animal. They want what's why and what to do. So that's an impetus. Another is good association. Now, good association is sent by Krishna for someone who has an aptitude for good association. Now, sometimes good association comes just because they want to do good. Even people don't want good. But if one wants, then good association is an impetus. And when I feel that benefit from that good association and compare it to without it, I want it. It resonates, it feels, I feel some benefit coming to my life from that good association. So that's an impetus. No, there are gyanis. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, the 4 types of pious men to render service to me. So that's a clue to impetus. But some persons are genuinely, I've met a number recently, I met a number of younger generation people that are genuinely searching. And there's, the resources out there are abundantly available through, media and, information technology. So it gets confusing. But they're searching, that's an impetus. So they come across this, they come across that. So they find there's some truths over there. There's some truths over here. There's some truths. It's an alternative. And so some people, young people today especially, looking for an alternative. And some people just try to create their alternative, but some persons want something that's genuine and they can connect with something that's not just traditional, but very genuine. They can feel something, and when they feel something, that's an impetus. Curiosity, that's one of the 4. The 3rd type of the 4, they're curious. What's out there? Impetus. Experimenting in life to find something we all want, which is happiness. That's an impetus. So this is spiritual association or sadhusanga. When you meet people who are refined culturally and spiritually, that's attractive. That's an impetus. I like this character, this quality, this personality, this lifestyle. It makes sense. So that's an impetus. Now there's lots of distractions, to say the least. Prabhupada writes, in this age of Kali, the atmosphere is surcharged with opposition. Nice language. So it's not obstacle-free, but impetus is having a yad yad acharati shreshtas, having a role model, a great personality that you admire, that you can become like, because it's part of life. And one sees from becoming knowledgeable in the history of spirituality, this is a role model. That's an impetus. I want to become like that. Opposition, difficulties, obstacles, plenty. Internal and external, both. But there's an impetus. Search for truth. Bhakti Siddhanta wrote a whole essay, Search for Truth. It became published as a book, Search for Truth. That's meaningful to some people. Not just pleasure, but something that's a little higher than just pleasure is truth. And within truth, there's another kind of pleasure. So often people that do continue, start and then continue, it's a combination of impetuses, and it may change through the course of time, more of this and less of that or something. And that's quite natural and it's quite fine. Okay.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Anything else? Online, anything? No. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.